All right, it's 10:33. Let's go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone to the Travel Information Meeting, December 2020. My name is Kelly McGarry with Travel Services, and Compliance Analyst. Also joining us is Teresa Athen, Assistant Director within Procurement. She oversees travel and procurement services, or procurement customer service, sorry. And April Berger, who is a Compliance Analyst within Travel as well. Just a couple of housekeeping things. So kind of like we mentioned in the email, how we'll be handling questions is if you have any questions related to the content that we're presenting, so that slide that we're presenting, feel free to type those questions in the chat and we will answer them. And then if you have any general questions, so any general compliance questions or content not related to the slide that we're presenting, we're going to go ahead and wait to answer those till the end. So if we see any during the presentation, we'll be mentioning that we'll be holding off on those. And then also for the 75% survey section, we have quite a few slides on that one. So we're going to get through all the slides and we're kind of expecting quite a few questions in that section. So we will wait till we present those slides and then present them at the end. And April will remind you when we get to that point. Let's go ahead and get started. Oh, and also I was going to mention, in case you didn't see in the email also, we will be sending the slides out as a YouTube link. So there will be a recording. We'll also be sending the PDF version of the slides. So if you don't feel like taking notes, just know that this will be recorded and we will be sending it out at a later date. And usually we send it about 2 business days after the meeting. So first thing we're going to look at is some new travel website metrics. So what we did was back a while ago, I think it was in October 2019, we presented some website data to you. And in May of this year, we launched our new website. So I wanted to do just a little bit of a side-by-side, take a look at the old website data that we had presented, and take a look at the new website data just to see kind of how things have trended, and how things have changed. And we found a couple of things that were pretty interesting. So one thing we looked at before was how you were actually getting to the website. And we noticed that so far there's been a behavioral change. And we see it as actually a good thing. And so previously when looking at the page visits from 2018-19 fiscal year, 58.2% of people got there by doing an organic search. So that'd be like using search engines like Google. So for example, if you were trying to find, the UW per diem policy, if you went to Google, typed in UW per diem, and then got to the page that way, it would capture it that way. Also, if you use like the search functionality at the top of the website, if you've ever used the search functionality when you're on your UW website, it usually uses like Google to help get you there. So if you're doing it that way, it'd be caught in that data as well. And then 41.8% of people are getting there by visiting a direct link. So that'd be if you are like on our homepage using like one of the menu drop downs, click the link, or if someone directly like sent you the link in an email, something like that, that would be how you get there by a direct link. And when I presented that before, I actually was pretty surprised that more people were getting there from an organic search as opposed to a direct link. I thought it would be actually the opposite. And we realized that's probably because the website needed updating and it needed to be more user-friendly for navigating. So we kind of used that data to help drive our decisions and how we built the new website. And so far, so we just released it in May. So obviously the new website hasn't been around for a whole long. And we are starting to see it trend towards how we would like it to trend. And so we saw a reduction in the organic search and about a 10% increase in direct links. So we kind of see that as a win. So it feels like people are now able to get to like the homepage and use like the drop downs and navigate to the website. We're also hoping the new policy index that we just created, which we're going to present on today, will also help trend it that way. And we'll go over that when we get to that section. Another kind of behavioral change, pretty slight, but still an improvement, is the way people are getting the website based on what device. And so previously it was 94%, accessing from a PC or a laptop, about 4% mobile, and 1% tablet. And so we're seeing a slight trend upwards to using a mobile and tablet. We think that definitely part of that would be people are working from home. So if people are at home, maybe they're just checking. It's easier to, when they're not at work at the office, they just have their phone close by. Maybe they're walking around their apartment or house and they're accessing the website from their mobile device. But we're also kind of hoping that because the website's a little bit more clean, a little bit more organized, that it would be actually more mobile friendly. And when we were designing it, that was something that we kind of considered when we were creating it, hoping that people could actually review the information on the go a little bit easier. We did see a bit of an increase on that so far. And last time we did take a look at, what our most visited pages are. And I went ahead and did an analysis on this as well. And just to kind of keep the data clean, went ahead and just took a look at the top 7 pages. And previously, the most visited page was related to per diem, and that still is number 1. So yeah, we believe just because that has a lot to do with like travel planning. People want to know how much per diem they get. It's just a big part of the compliance. So people are still visiting that page a lot. The policy index, even before the rework, is still getting a lot of hits. And I'd imagine now that we have this new policy index that's a little more dynamic, I'd expect that to go up a little bit more. We're also excited that our new book and pay page, so the book and pay, which also includes our new vendor discount page, is seeing a lot of hits. So it's already up to 12% over the span of since the new website was released in May. COVID-19, 11%, which makes sense. Obviously, it's kind of the big thing people are thinking about or needing to know about with that going on. And then the next 3 are lodging, receipts, and training. We're also excited to see training because that page just had a rework. Before, it was not popping up in the top 7, and that page got reworked to just better present you our training opportunities and all that. So we like seeing that trend up. All right, now we're going to take a look at the new policy index. Just want to point out where it is on the website and just give you kind of an idea of the new look and feel of it. And it's organized, it's pretty simple, organized by page and topic, but it has direct links to each of the page and the topic. So previously it was just a kind of a simple bullet list that just had all of our pages. And now instead of that, it's a little bit more dynamic. It has the page and it also lists like major topics from that page. So it's a good place to start if you, let's say, you just can't remember something about the advanced policy or something like that. You can come to the index, and then, or if you have like a question about, official duty station, you can't remember if that's on the ground transportation page or, the airfare page or whatever it may be. It helps just kind of guide you to where the information is. And I'm just going to switch my share real quick. To the website. Here we go. And so where it is if you click right here, policies and procedures, that'll bring you there. And then it's also, if you go on the drop down, the very first thing there is policy index. And that will bring you there as well. And so this is how it is. So each of the pages is now linked. So if you click any of these, it'll bring you directly to that page. And then, like I mentioned, there are the subcategories. So these are the topics the major topics you would find on that page. It doesn't have every single thing, that may be on that page, but we took the time just to make sure that we grabbed any sort of important information or main topics that somebody would be looking for. So yeah, just to give an example, like I had mentioned before, like official duty station, you can scroll down, look for that topic, and you'll see official duty station, official residence, temporary duty station. It is on the ground transportation page. You can click it, and then it brings you right to that policy. So hopefully that'll help you out if you can't figure out, exactly where something is on the page. It'll help guide that process, and it'll definitely be a good tool for like new hires, trying to take on the policy and all that kind of cool stuff. All right, I'm going to switch my share back to the presentation. Give me 1 second. Put it back into presentation mode. There we go. Okay, so that's the new policy index. And yeah, if you have any feedback regarding the index, how it could be improved or anything like that, feel free to reach us out. Or if you feel like it's missing a topic that it should really be on there, something like that, we're open to feedback on that. Next thing we're going to take a look at is our new enterprise car rental versus mileage comparison tool. So this is something that was actually developed by Enterprise Car Rental for us. And it's to help you compare whether renting a car or reimbursing somebody for mileage is more economical. And surprisingly, you'd actually be surprised. A lot of times, actually renting a car on our contract actually is more economical than doing the mileage. And being on the contract has, some benefits such as the liability coverage that comes for free and all that kind of cool stuff. So if you're ever kind of wondering or trying to determine, which one is more economical, or maybe you have a traveler coming to you and they're saying, "Oh, I can't decide whether I want to drive my car or if renting a car would be better." You can point them to this tool, and they can actually figure out what would be more economical. Or it's also just a good, just a department planning tool for like administrators trying to figure out what would be the best. Got a question. Is there a comparison chart for fleet services versus personal mileage? Not that I'm aware of. You could check maybe with fleet services to see if they have a tool like that. But I have not come across one. But if they had one, they would have that tool. Marcus asks, have you noticed that Enterprise is now charging a one-way drop fee? They did not have that charge in the past. Yes. So yeah, they have changed their fees around. That state or that contract is negotiated at the state level. And yeah, we did notice that there was a little bit of difference there. And I believe we did present at our enterprise did present some information about that in one of our previous meetings. But yeah, you'll want to make sure you're considering that. But let me go ahead and just pop over to the tool. I just want to show you where it is on the website. And just how to get there and kind of what it looks like, just so you have a general idea. So I'm going to switch back to the website again. And like it says in the slide, this is on the ground transportation section. If you go to enterprise contract, is the section it's in. And you'll see right here in the third bullet, cost compare privately owned vehicle mileage versus enterprise national reimbursement and savings calculator tool. So if you just click this, it'll bring you to the tool. And then down here is the enterprise mileage reimbursement comparison. And I'm not going to take the time to go through and do like an entire one, just for time's sake. But you can kind of get a general idea of how it works. So you can set, your pickup location and all that, when you're going to be picking it up, when you're going to be returning it, all that kind of stuff. And then what you can do is also estimate whatever all they need as far as the reimbursement is. They would ask you for the total distance in miles. And then what it's going to do is check the availability, and you can actually go through, kind of do your quote, pick the vehicle, and then it's going to show you how that compares to whether if you were reimbursing that person for mileage. And again, it's an optional tool. It's not something you have to use. But if you're just trying to figure out, what's more economical, it's there as a tool for you. Okay, I'm gonna switch back to presentation. Okay. And now I'm going to pass it off to April, and she's going to talk to you about just some kind of general updates related to the COVID bans.
Thank you, Kelly. Hi, everybody. So as you know, we have been receiving questions from departments. I'm pretty sure we are all aware that there is a travel ban for international travel. So our office has been fielding questions regarding domestic travel. But the Office of Global Affairs has provided some updated information on their website regarding foreign travel. So while it is still restricted until further notice, there is the option to request an exception waiver. We won't get into the details of what is required and what approvals are needed to get a waiver granted, but we have provided a link for you so that you can access that information. And then regarding domestic travel, we are still in phase 2 of the Safe Start plan, and guidance states that while in phase 1 and 2, domestic travel is for essential and limited non-essential travel. We've found that it's really up to the department to determine whether the travel is necessary or not. And then we also provided the link for further information regarding that. And all of this information is still on that link that Kelly referenced earlier regarding our website metrics. And we did move that link up to the top of our COVID information page so that it's right at the top and easily accessible for you. Kelly, next slide. Okay, so as we prepare for finance transformations, Workday Go Live, our office has been reviewing all travel policies for potential changes just to create more efficiency, simplification, accommodation to the new system functionality, etc. The list goes on. But we also want to make sure that we stay within federal and state guidelines where necessary. And our per diem policy is currently one of the policies we are working on reviewing at this point in time. So we would just like to reiterate before we go through these next few slides that no decision has been made. But that this survey was just a part of our initial information gathering process. As many of you know, whenever we review our policies, we always reach out to you, campus, our stakeholders, to make sure that what we are considering changing, that there is no conflict. Or at least as minimal as possible. So like Kelly mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, any questions that you have, please feel free to put them in the chat, but we will be waiting to answer those questions until we get through the end of the slides, because maybe some of your questions might be answered in the information that is covered in one of the slides. So with that said, we want to thank you all for responding. We had an overwhelming 358 responses, which is really high for any of our surveys. So thank you so much for taking the time. And we found that 66% were in favor of the policy change. Kelly, next slide. So we wanted to actually take the opportunity to share with you some of the common themes in the survey feedback and kind of address those common themes. There were things that we wanted to make sure we shared with you so that you can have a better understanding of why we were even considering the 75% per diem policy change. So for those of you that aren't aware, this is actually federal policy. So this is not a policy that we have just drafted on our own. This is actual federal policy. Currently, we are following state policy. And what those requirements are, along with it's kind of like a mixture of state with our own guidelines. But in changing this to the 75%, this would be a federal policy lineup, I guess you could say. So we also want to reiterate that this policy change would not occur until Workday go live. Our Ariba system is set up the way it is, and it cannot be changed any further. So it wouldn't be until we transition to Workday that this change would be implemented. So there was some concern regarding, knowledge, understanding, and training. That would all be worked in and rolled into the Workday training. And then there were some questions and concerns regarding overriding the amount, and we always like to reiterate that departments can always be more restrictive. So one of the examples is a PI can reduce per diem further than what that 75% amount is. We are confirming a Workday capability on the override amount function to make sure that it is a seamless process. Kelly, next slide. So another question our concern we received was regarding independent contractors and consultants and how the per diem policy would be applied to them. They are paid via a non-PO invoice, which falls outside the scope of travel policy. So that would not affect them. Provided meals would be deducted at the full cost of the meal from the 75% allowance. So some people were concerned regarding provided meals, and they would be deducted just as they are now. And then we wanted to talk about the biggest concern that was brought up was regarding potentially shortchanging the traveler and them not getting the full per diem based off of what their travel times are. And we got a lot of different scenarios provided to us. And we wanted to point out that, in our current policy, there is potential for, I don't want to use the word manipulation because that's not the correct term, but there are instances where it could be advantageous and disadvantages to the traveler with our current policy. And we wanted to highlight what the trade-offs are if we were to move forward with the 75% policy. So in the next slide, Kelly's going to talk to you a little bit more about what those trade-offs are and some examples and what that may look like. So Kelly, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so like April mentioned, one of the common themes that came up is definitely some anxiety regarding not paying a traveler 100% per diem for that day when we would have normally paid them for 3 meals. And it's definitely a valid concern. But we just wanted to point out and just make sure everybody's aware of the fact that there's kind of a little bit of a trade-off. So yes, there are situations where in our current policy, they would have got the full per diem, but now they're getting 75%. But there are also quite a few scenarios, and it actually kind of seems like more often than not, they would actually get a slight advantage. And so I went ahead and just kind of laid out a couple examples. This doesn't hit, every example that there would be, but just to kind of give you a little bit more of a general idea of where like the traveler actually might gain an advantage and where it becomes a little bit more of a trade-off than you might think. And so if the traveler is entering travel status, so this is, think of this as like a side-by-side with the current policy and what the future state policy would be. So when they're entering travel status, so this would mean, they're getting ready to go to the airport, they're leaving to go for their trip. Is what we mean by entering travel status. If they leave before 8 a.m., that's our time cutoff. If they leave before 8 a.m., then this new policy would be a disadvantage to the traveler. And we hear your concerns, and that's one of the reasons we're still considering whether we're going to move to this policy or not, and all that kind of good stuff. But if they do leave before 8 a.m., then it would be a disadvantage to the traveler, because our current policy, if they leave before 8 a.m., they get breakfast, lunch, and dinner for that day. Our breakfast is calculated at 25%. So they'd be getting 75% instead of 100% per diem for that day. We hear you loud and clear. Totally get it. We know that's a problem area. If they leave before 8 a.m., sorry, they should say if they leave after 8 a.m., but before 2 p.m. I realize there's a typo there. So if they leave after, oh wait, sorry, it is right. If they leave after 8 a.m. before 2 p.m., then there's no difference. So the reason there's no difference is because our per diem is calculated at 25%. So if they leave after 8 a.m. before 2 p.m., then they would actually get exactly 75% per diem in our current policy for that day. So that's why we're saying that's no difference. And then when they're entering travel status, if they leave after 2 p.m., then it would become an advantage to the traveler, because they would have normally got less than 75% per diem for that day. Now they are getting 75%. So just to show a little bit of the trade-off where it could be an advantage, no difference, as well as a disadvantage to the traveler. And then the next example is kind of looking at a few scenarios where they're coming off travel status. So think of this as they got back to the airport, they're coming back for their trip, they're driving back home. And then based on the different times, this is kind of how it would look. And so if they arrive after 6 p.m., so they come back, it's after 6 p.m., then that would be a disadvantage to the traveler, because they would have gotten the breakfast, lunch, and dinner. So again, they'd be losing out on that scenario. But if they're coming back, if they arrive after 12 p.m. and before 6 p.m., it would actually be an advantage to the traveler, because they would actually just get 55% of the per diem that day if you actually look at the math in our current policy. So with the new policy, they'd actually be getting 75% instead of 55%. So it's actually, that scenario is an advantage. And then if they arrive before 12 p.m., then that would also be an advantage as well, because for that one, they would just be getting breakfast, which is 25%. So they're gaining a nice little 50% there. And we read all your comments. We totally understand, how this may be a little tricky, communicating this to the traveler, because there are the examples where there would be a disadvantage. But if we do end up moving forward with this policy, it's important to understand where it would be an advantage as well. So if you're able to show them examples and say, yeah, you lose out in this scenario, but when you take this trip, you actually gain 20%. And so there are a lot of scenarios where it kind of balances itself out. And just wanted to make sure that you're aware of just kind of how that relates to it. And so, that's our last slide for today, and regarding the 75%. And it looks like I got a few questions. So I'm going to start to jump into those. And since we're at the end of the presentation, also feel free to ask any general questions as well. I'm going to try to get to the 75% ones first, and then we'll start to get to the general questions. And I forgot to mention earlier, we also have Rachel Drapeau here from Finance Transformation. I just assigned her as a co-host. So if you have any questions related to FT, general questions, feel free to ask those as well. So now we're going to move into the Q&A aspect. Okay, let's see here. So Sue Tipple had a question about, will REBA go away once the finance transformation happens, or will ER still be done in REBA? So that's an FT question. But yeah, we will for sure be moving into Workday. And maybe after we get to the 75%, Rachel could jump in and give you a little more detail on that. Is there any way to get data when our travelers enter or leave travel status? That might help us know how often travelers would be negatively impacted by new policy. That's a really great question. It's actually a question we already kind of asked ourselves. I did actually kind of look at the data. We were kind of thinking about it, and we don't believe there is a way to do that based on the Ariba reporting. But we haven't completely crossed that out. So we're still kind of exploring it. If we think of any way that we can pull that data, maybe we can work with the finance unit called UW Data Group. They have a little bit more tools than we do to extract information like that. But yeah, we would like to see if what that impact may be. It's something that we did think of already, and it doesn't look like it's possible with the REBA reporting. But we would like to explore that further. Question from John. Once the 75% per diem on first and last day is fully implemented, if they're disputing and arguing for 100% per diem for those days, will we send them to this policy and just let them know that there's nothing we can do? Yeah, just basically, think of it just like any of our other policies. Once this became official policy, if someone was disputing it, just think it'd be the same as if they were disputing something else. So, if they got first class airfare and they don't have a justification for it, you would point them to the policy and say, this is the policy. It's first class airfare. You have to have a justification. Same would go for this. So if they were disputing it, you would just be relying on our policy as your backup. Do we have any way to account for actual travel time versus arrival and departure time due to time zone changes? Yeah, that's kind of a tricky question. The way, we usually treat it is to keep the time zone consistent. And generally we go, based off like Pacific time, whenever you're making that. What you can't do is the traveler can't you can't change the time zone as you're calculating the per diem. So the important part is keeping it consistent. And usually you go based on, the local time, where they're leaving from. You can't, start in Pacific time and then they're on the East Coast and change it to Eastern time. And because there could be, if you did that, there's instances where it'd be a disadvantage and an advantage to the traveler. So the important part with time zones is keeping it consistent. Agree on need for data. Most of my travelers leave prior to 8 a.m. Alaska flights in order to fully utilize the day. If it is a West Coast travel, it also allows for getting to the East Coast, attending an evening function. And yeah, we totally understand, Lynn. And of course, a lot of people, leave before 8 a.m. And so it's something we're thinking about and considering as a part of this policy. And kind of like I mentioned, we hear you loud and clear. But with the trade-off, we just want to present some examples where it would be no difference and an advantage to the traveler as well. But it's something, we're going to consider carefully when we're evaluating the policy. And it's, something that's going to be evaluated by us, by FT, by our leadership. It's not, we aren't, the ultimate authority on this. So it's going to be under kind of a big review if we were to move forward with something like this. Is there a waiver for the one-day traveler? Leave at 5 a.m., get back at 11 p.m. So yeah, we did have some questions about single day trips. And based on the policy, there wouldn't be a first and last day. Technically, it would just be a first day. So for any of those single day trips, based on the policy, and we'd still confirm this and make sure this is totally right. But based on how the policy is, they would just get 75% per diem for that day. So yeah, in that instance, it would be a disadvantage to the traveler based on current policy. How does this account for the difference in price between breakfast and dinner? 75% for both situations. Missing breakfast or missing the dinner is the same. That's a good question. So kind of back to the bullet point that April was saying about, so how the meals get accounted for. It's a little difficult to explain the provided meals, but basically how it works is the cost of the meal would be based on 100% per diem and not 75%. If they were provided a meal, it would just get that amount of the meal would get deducted from the 75%, just like you normally would today from the 100%. And if we were to move forward with the policy, that's something we have to do. So there would be no policy change to provided meals if, let's say, it's the first day. So I'll just give an example to make it maybe a little bit more clear. So someone's traveling to a conference, they leave on Sunday, the conference starts on Monday, that Sunday is the travel day. Let's say the night before, Sunday night, was an official conference meeting and it was a dinner. It was an official part of the conference. And so we consider that to be a provided meal. The system will have a way to reconcile that meal. So there'd be a way to zero out that dinner that was provided on Sunday. So that's something that we are exploring with the functionality with the finance transformation team. But the best way to think of it is the provided meals would be accounted for just like they are today. So if a traveler goes on a one-night trip, they basically take a loss. Yeah, it just depends on exactly what that trip is. It could be a one night. If they left at 8, it depends. If they left the day before 8 a.m., then it would be a loss based on the current policy. But if they left after 8 a.m. and then stayed one night, then it would basically be no difference kind of thing. Or before 2 p.m., there'd be no difference. And if they left after 2 p.m. on that day before, it would be an advantage. So again, just points back to that trade-off slide. I agree with Lynn. The bulk of our travel is East Coast, and the 75% would be a disadvantage to our travelers. Yeah, no, we understand for sure. Would you please clarify on how a PI can be more restrictive on per diem? I misunderstood what you said. So yeah, for that part, we're making sure, because there's a lot of situations where departments need to restrict the per diem. And in Ariba today, if you're on the meal per diem line item, there's the box that says override, in which you can reduce. You can't override to an amount higher than the per diem, but you can reduce to an amount lower. So we just want to clarify that we're aware that there's a lot of situations in which the department needs to be more restrictive than our per diem policy. So we are, when we work with the FT team to everything built, we're making sure that functionality does exist. So that's kind of what we were talking about for that section. How do you recommend processing travel for people moving? For people moving in and out of travel status, personal time under the proposed change. So the personal time part is a little tricky, but the best way to kind of think of it is basically like provided meals. So kind of how you zero out meals whenever there's personal time, the same thing would still exist on the first and last day. So any moment where there was personal time over the span of those meals on that day, you would reduce that meal down to 0. And regarding the personal time, there probably would, if we were to move forward, there would be a little bit more kind of clear sort of guidance related to that. So that is, I'll leave the personal time a little bit as a to be determined, because we're still kind of exploring. We want to make sure we wrap our head around all that properly. And we're in communications with GSA, who's the federal agency who actually oversees this policy. And so we're still kind of in the early stages of that stuff. So the personal time I'm going to leave it to be determined, but most likely we would be treating it like provided meals kind of thing, and you would zero it out like normal. New travel policy is a disadvantage for medics when using Alaska Airlines going to our remote campuses. So yeah, I've already kind of addressed the trade-off stuff, and yeah, we understand. What if a traveler comes a day before the meeting? What if the travel comes a day before the meeting day or leaves a day after the meeting day to flight or meeting schedule? They get 75% for those travel days, which are non-meeting days. Correct. So yeah, the policy is based on first and last days of travel. So it'd be the actual travel days. Any of the meeting days in between, they would be treated just like we do today. They would get 100% per diem for those days. So it's just based on travel days. And the reason you guys didn't see that in the chat, I have a few that were the direct messages. How does it affect traveler who goes for a one-day trip with the 11-hour restriction? So yeah, I already kind of answered that one before. It would be a travel day, so most likely it would be a 75% for that day. If we are sending folks on trips, don't we want the bulk of their time spent? Hold on one second. If we are sending folks on trips, don't we want the bulk of their time spent meeting with individuals? There are not many circumstances where it is advantageous to leave after 8 a.m. Um, yeah, so I mean that makes sense. I mean, obviously, we wouldn't want to discourage people from leaving before 8 a.m. if it's advantageous to the business to leave before 8 a.m. And yeah, it's just something for us to consider whether we want to move forward with this policy or not. So it's a good comment. We understand it. Can you tell us why this is being considered more cost effective, I assume? So this is a good question. You may be wondering, yeah, why are we even just looking at this in general? And to be honest, yeah, this policy is something our office has been aware of for several years. And it's a policy that we think would, in the long run, the big scheme of things, be actually a big advantage to campus. We understand, the anxiety regarding travelers and maybe not getting 100%, all that kind of stuff. But yes, more cost effective, and the best way to think of it is like administrative time. So people are spending a lot of times collecting start and end times of travel status on their travel forms, going back and forth on email. And so now what'll happen is you just have to determine what their start and first and last travel day is. So administrative burden wise, we see it as an advantage for sure. If we have to translate every time recorded in the reimbursement for meals or airfare, et cetera, to the same time zone, how do we account for day changes then? Also, the state still may not account for time spent in travel for long international flights. I'm not sure that I'm quite understanding that question. How do we account for day changes then? I'm assuming because the time zone is so different that the day is even changing. It still points back to what I was saying. It still needs to stay consistent. So you would adjust the day based on what you had originally started that time zone as. So even if there's a time and a day change, you just keep rolling it back. You keep it consistent. So you look at, what time they left. You ignore like how it gets reflected on the airfare ticket or whatever it may be. You just convert based on when they left, what Pacific time was, and then at that final stopping time, what Pacific time is again. And even if it shifted the day, then you'll need to shift the day back, whatever it may be. So they should never be gaining an advantage based on time zones. It's all same time zone when you start it, same time zone when you end it. That way, they're not getting additional or getting cut meals because of time zone changes. So what's the point of the per diem change? I just answered. Would a PI or department be able to grant 100% per diem to students or staff where the fiscal impact would be higher? So no, if we move forward with this policy, like I mentioned, departments can always be more restrictive than our policy, but they can't be more lenient. So there wouldn't be an instance where you could actually just make the decision to give them 100. They would get 75%. Can per diems be overridden to a higher amount at all? Example, a disabled traveler may be limited in the accommodations they can stay at. If it's related to ADA stuff, things may change because ADA can be kind of an exception to certain things. If there's a strong case that can be made related to ADA, that's something we would be exploring with your office. But in general, no, we would not allow the per diems to be over into a higher amount if this policy moved forward. Will faculty have any input? I think they would accept this change better if they knew they had a voice in the process. Yeah, that's definitely something we can consider. So obviously, we did this survey, and it's possible that this survey made it to faculty, but for the most part, we do realize it's administrators and people preparing expense reports, more on that side of things. But we can take that as a suggestion and consider, maybe doing a survey for faculty. I can't make that decision right now. We would need to run that up through our leadership and stuff like that. But I'll make a note of that. It's a good question, and I agree they do have a big say in this. or it's definitely a big impact on them. So someone else agreeing, yeah. A lot of the East Coast travel, leaving before 8 a.m., ride back after 6 p.m. to save another night on the road. Seems like we should, yeah. So yeah, again, putting back to the trade-off, and we understand that there's instances where this would be different. All right. Per diems come out of individual budgets, which have mostly planned for these costs. Why are individual per diems a big concern to overall UW operations if no other budgets are impacted? Let me think about this one for a second. Per diems come out of individual budgets, which have mostly planned for these costs. Yeah, that's a good question. I think that kind of just points back to like why we're considering it, and I'm just going to answer that with what I was saying before. Something that a policy we've kept an eye on over the years. We see it as an advantage, and also kind of interestingly, the state is actually kind of in their initial stages of looking at this as a policy as well. They're at the same exact point as us, as they have no idea if they're actually going to do it. They're kind of doing some fact gathering, but at the state level, they actually want this to be what the state policy is as well. If that were to happen, then we would have to switch this policy anyways. But just kind of point that as an example, it's just a lot of people do see this as a overall advantage to people's budgets. A lot of administrative time saved. Trade-off on giving the East Coast traveler the full current per diem is that the cost of a hotel room for an additional night is way more than a meal. Okay, yeah, it's a good point, but really, there shouldn't be situations where someone is changing, what time they're leaving based on like a hotel room. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure how to answer that one. Apologize. Someone was asking how likely will this new policy be implemented? Not really able to answer that question right now. Again, we're just doing some fact gathering. Technically, the campus was in favor based on the survey so far. It doesn't mean for sure that we're going to move to it. So I can't really answer that question right now. Do we know if our peers follow this policy? That is a good question. It's something I think we believe we started to explore, but I'm going to make a note of that because benchmarking is always a really good thing to do. It's something I've always thought is a good thing to do. So I believe for the most part, since it's if we're talking about state agencies, they would generally be following something close to our policy. The way the state policy actually works for this is the agencies are actually allowed to establish their own meal periods. So it's not based on the federal policy. So the 75% rule is the federal policy. The state policy gives us the ability to establish meal periods. And so the other state agencies at this time most likely would not be following 75%, but we could look at peer institutions, so like other higher ed and stuff like that. But we have not done that yet, so I don't have an answer for it. I'm just acknowledging that that's a good point. I'll make a note of that. Does this mean we no longer need to enter the flight times on the ER, just the date? What it would mean, so this actually does not relate to flight times at all. People use flight times to help determine per diem. But honestly, we don't really know. I can't answer that question because I don't know if we did release this policy, it wouldn't be until Workday go live. And so we'll have to see how that all shapes out on the airfare line item in Workday expense report. Whether we're going to be requesting that time, we don't know that yet. But where it would change things, so just imagine the new meal per diem line item in Workday is now just going to ask you for a first and last day of travel as opposed to what time they started and ended their meal per diem period. So systematically it would look, I can't say for sure that's what it's going to look like, but that's to give you a general idea, it would just be asking for the days instead of the time. Jessica said, I agree. Administrative time would be saved entering the travel info, but the grief travelers would put on administrators would be a trade-off. So yeah, just making a comment regarding the trade-off. We understand. One comment on your note that the majority of folks wanted the change. Most of the folks you surveyed will not be affected by the different amount of per diem, so we don't lose any money. Correct. Yeah, that kind of points back to what someone was saying about the faculty survey. And yeah, well, it's something we'll definitely think about and consider, because yes, it does affect travelers. But again, there are a lot of instances where they would be gaining an advantage. So if we point that part out, maybe they would more would be in favor than you might expect. But yeah, it's something we can definitely consider. And it looks like I'm at the end of the questions so far, but I'd imagine some will keep pouring in. But we have plenty of time. So if you have any questions related to 75%, and just a reminder, we're open to any questions. But that's all we have for the slides. So if, as far as the meeting itself, we are in the Q&A. But if you want to stick around and continue to see questions related to the 75% rule or anything else, we'll just keep moving forward with the chat questions. Would be good to get the data from 2019 to see how many folks win and how many lose. Yeah, so that's been said a couple times, and it's a little tricky. We'd have to do some sort of custom reporting through like a different office who has a little bit more access. But it's something that I've already written down. We would like to see some data impact if we can. Sorry if I missed this. When do you anticipate making your decision on the 75% rule? The decision on this would not be made for quite some time, and it would not be implemented until Workday Go Live. Currently, Workday Go Live is set for July 1st, 2022. So we're talking about something that's more than 2 years away. So there'd be lots and lots of time as far as this. So up until July 1st, 2022, for sure, you won't have to tell the travelers about this until that time, kind of thing. But yeah, but since FT is being designed and everything like that, so we wouldn't be able to wait. Obviously we can't wait until July 1st to make the 2022 to make the actual official decision. But that's not when it wouldn't go live until then. But we would be keeping you updated if anything was moving forward as best we can. And yeah, like I mentioned before, if you have any other general questions too and related to other content, and again, we got Rachel here from UW-FT. So if you have any FT questions, feel free to ask those as well. Is it okay to give them a heads up about this possible change right now? Yeah, you definitely can do that. I would just make sure to make it very clear that that we're still exploring it. It's in the very early stages. But if you would like to kind of get ahead of it, or if you're anticipating if it does come out that there'd be quite a bit of anxiety or whatever it may be, you are welcome to start telling them. But just make sure you let them know it's still only under like discussion.
And I'd actually like to add on top of that, please be advised that we have not shared this information or made any kinds of recommendations, suggestions, or presentations to our upper level management. As we stated from the very beginning, this is just very initial fact gathering information. So, please, be cautious that in sharing this information, they could be going to other higher leadership that aren't even aware that we are considering this. We always like to gather our information first before we make any kind of presentation. So just like Kelly said, with caution, please be aware of that.
So let's see. So who should faculty contact if they want to chime in about the possible new policy? I would say at this point, kind of like based on what April said, if they want to express their concern to us, would probably the best place right now, as we're doing this fact gathering and all that stuff. Question from Sasha regarding time zone changes in international travel. When the traveler returns to Seattle in the morning the next day, is it okay to extend the meals per diem for that day and add a comment that because the traveler took a long 11-hour international flight, we would like to reimburse breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Um, I think I would need more context in the actual timings to figure out how this works. But there's no exception in our meal per diem policy that based on how long they travel that they would get extra meals than that they wouldn't be entitled to. It's just based on when did they start, what day they start, keeping it all in the same time zone, when they got back, and then you look at our actual meal per diem start and end times, and then that's how we determine what the per diems are. There wouldn't be just because if they were traveling for 11 hours, there's no extent like any sort of extension to per diem based on travel time. That doesn't exist in the policy. So again, it's just when did they start, when did they end. And then yeah, if you have any example, if you want to reach out to us separately, you have any examples with like kind of funky time zone stuff, we can help you walk through it. I know it gets a little confusing if when they're going all the way across the world and stuff. The time zone stuff does get a little wild, but the important thing is the consistency. But there is no exception to like grant extra meals based on travel time. That for sure is not a thing. Mia says, thank you so much for all the information today. No problem. It's our pleasure. I think it would be important to note in future trainings for travel policy that the time zone should be translated across the whole thing. Yeah, definitely something we can consider in our policy classes.
And we also, to note on that, we actually do state that on our travel website that we do not account for time zone changes. So we very specifically say that on our website. But I think to your point, it'd be a good idea to also highlight that in our trainings.
Yeah, obviously international travel is not really happening right now. But yeah, it's something that the university typically does do a lot. So yeah, it's a good training opportunity. I don't think I have that as content in the policy class. So I'll take that as a note. Okay. Do you have something you were going to say, Teresa? Just saw you unmuted yourself.
I was going to reiterate what April said about us not accounting for time zones. You use local time, so she did it for me. Thank you.
Yep. Yeah, and the consistency is the important part. Never like changing it over the time span of a meal per diem period. The time zone should never be shifted. Yeah, and so like April said, that policy we do state it on the meal per diem website. So page. So if anyone's ever pushing back on it, there's the official policy reference. You can go to the website and link it that way. Okay, looks like questions are starting to slow down a little bit. But again, yeah, we'll stick around. If anyone has any questions, let us know. yeah, for anyone that's heading out, we appreciate you stopping by. And again, we're always open to feedback and any improvements we can make to the information meeting. Feel free to let us know. We appreciate all the kind words too. And yeah, more to come on the 75% rule. We hear all your concerns loud and clear. We'll keep you updated, and we'll look into the data stuff. We'll look into maybe a faculty survey, and but yeah, we want you to. Obviously, there was definitely some concerns expressed today, but we want you to express those concerns. Those are helpful to us, and that's why we're doing the fact gathering. We want to know what everybody's feeling. So we appreciate all that. Faculty survey, would you also consider including UW INCO staff? I don't know what unit that is, but yeah, how the whole faculty survey thing would play out, I actually don't really know. We've never, since I've been in travel at least, we've never done a faculty survey before, so I'd have to just explore that in general because I don't know the best way to do it. But more to come on that.
Kelly, what we could do is have the individuals that were in this meeting extend that survey to their travelers, so that we could get traveler feedback as well.
Yeah,
that's something we could think about.
That's a good idea. Yeah, we'll think about that. Don't let's not do that yet. If we have the survey is closed, so we will. Okay. If we did do a faculty survey, what we would do is potentially send it out again, but we'll market it in a way for you all to pass it off to faculty, and we'll probably change it around a little bit to make it more geared towards faculty. So.
Good point.
Yeah, if we do that, we'll communicate all that on the listserv. We'll let you know. Regarding international flights and different legs of the flights, it's okay to reimburse what the traveler requests for meals per diem while they were in Seattle, New York, France. Yeah, I mean, it's very situational based on the travel. Or need a little bit more details, but what we typically for the per diem, it's based on business locations and not like transit locations. So with not all the details, I can't like say exactly if they would get per diem Seattle, New York, and France. It just depends on where the actual business occurred. But let's say they were leaving from Seattle and returning to Seattle, but the business occurred in New York and then the business occurred in France. Basically, you would start the per diem as New York per diem until they started to travel to France. Then typically, you would switch it to France, and then it would remain in France until all the way through the end of the trip. Is how that would work. But again, I'm just making up an example based on those. University of Washington Investment Management Company. Gotcha. Yeah, I don't know that unit. But yeah, I mean, we would do our best if we were doing another survey to make sure that it gets out to everyone. And I do like Teresa's idea of kind of remarketing the survey we already did, but having you guys pass it off to faculty. We would start it fresh though and do a new one and send it out to you guys, then have you send out the link. Probably be the best way to do it. Say Seattle per diem is $71, New York per diem is $130, France per diem is $331. Start per diem in Seattle though, right? And end per diem in Seattle. If Seattle is where they're leaving and then coming back to Seattle, you would have no Seattle per diem. That's not how we do the per diem. It's just based on business locations. But again, I'm just making that assumption based on what you said. If Seattle was a business location, it's a little bit different. But it sounds like, based on what you're saying, it sounds like they're leaving Seattle, they're going to New York, then they're going to France, and they're coming back to Seattle. There would be no Seattle per diem in that. It would be, the start would be New York per diem. And then when they switch, once they start heading to France for that next business location, it would switch to France per diem, and then it would remain in France per diem all the way back until when they got back home in Seattle. That's just how the per diem works. They start travel status leaving from Seattle, so wouldn't they get Seattle per diem first? No, that's not the case. It's per diem is not based on transit locations, as well as I was saying before. It's based on business locations. Seattle would not be the business location. Seattle is the transit location. So like even though they were like at the airport during breakfast time and leaving or on the flight, like getting on the plane, during lunchtime in Seattle, we wouldn't give them Seattle per diem. It would be New York per diem. Because it's based on the business location and it's not always based on where they physically are. It's based on where the business is occurring. It also includes like layovers. So like, let's say I'm flying. Let's say New York was just a layover. So I'm going Seattle to New York to France and then back to Seattle. If let's say I'm stopping in New York for 2 hours, I don't switch my per diem to New York for those 2 hours. That trip would be France per diem from start to finish. If the traveler requests the per diem for that location, then do we give them that per diem? It wouldn't be based on what the traveler requests. It's just based on how you've actually followed the policy and the guidance. So for that same example, Seattle, layover in New York, France, back to New York for a layover, back to Seattle, and France is the only business location. You have to give them France per diem the whole way. They can't say, oh, I'd rather have New York per diem or something, especially if it's an advantage, then they'd be breaking our policy. It'd be an audit risk. What if meals provided in the meeting? Do we just take off those meetings? Yeah, any provided meals, you zero those out. Well, yeah, if you want to go over more examples and stuff like that, Sasha, just to help you understand it, I'm happy to jump on a phone call or we can walk through some of your examples. I had to travel to Europe, and the per diem for that conference location was about 331 or a higher amount like that. Are we to reimburse the traveler the entire trip, that per diem amount? Yeah, if that was the only business location was that conference, and every other location is just a transit location or a layover, then yeah, they'd be getting that per diem. Unless there was like a funding requirement or a department policy that's more strict, saying you're going to give them less. Like let's say like the funding being used has this policy that says they'll never pay more than $200 per day for per diem. Then you would use our override and then override it down. But our general policy of the per diem, it allows them. So, but yeah, let's say the funding's really tight or something like that. You need to come up with 330. There's no way the funding can afford to pay $300 per day for per diem. It would need to yeah, then you could use the override or set a department policy or follow the funding policy and stuff like that. That's why we're exploring the override stuff.
So Kelly, it looks like the chat has stopped. Did we want to call it 15 minutes early?
Yeah, let's go ahead and call the meeting. So yeah, thank you everyone for coming. And if you have any questions you can think of, feel free to reach out to us. Our contact's travel@uw.edu. Yeah, that's travel@uw.edu. And our number is 206-543-5858. You can find all that info on the website. Feel free to reach out to us. We're going to go ahead and close the meeting 15 minutes early. Yeah, we appreciate you for coming. Look forward to the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.